Agent Mark Steele had been working for a little-known branch of the government for over a decade, one that investigates cryptid reports deemed plausible. His latest assignment brought him to the dense forests of Olympic National Park in Washington state. His division had received multiple reports of strange sightings and unexplained phenomena in the area over the past few months. On a cool September morning, Steele set out on what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. He packed his standard-issue gear, a high-resolution camera, night vision goggles, and various data collection devices. The forest was thick with towering Douglas firs and western red cedars, their branches creating a canopy that blocked much of the sunlight. As Steele hiked deeper into the wilderness, he noticed a strange buzzing noise that seemed to envelop him, almost like an electrical charge in the air. He made a note of this anomaly in his field journal and continued on. After about 3 hours of hiking, Steele came across a small clearing. In the center was a pool of dark, still water. The surface was smooth, almost like glass, smooth to the point that he wondered if it was really water. Steele approached cautiously, his training kicking in as he scanned the area for any signs of danger, and then dipped his finger in to test. As he was doing so, Steele noticed a faint smell. It was musty and slightly sweet, unlike a normal forest scent. He took a mental note but continued on with his work and took out a sample container to collect some of the water for later analysis. Just as Steele was about to dip the container into the pool, he saw movement about 30 yards away to his right. He turned slowly, his heart rate increasing as he tried to focus on the area and process what he was seeing. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a creature unlike anything Steele had ever encountered in person, even in his many years in the government. It was tall, at least 8 feet, and covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. Its limbs were long and oddly jointed, ending in what appeared to be webbed hands and feet. His first thought was that he had come across a mutant cryptid, a double whammy if you want to call it that. The creature's head was elongated in a strange way and somewhat fish-like, with large, bulbous eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim forest light. A series of gill-like slits pulsed on either side of its neck. Steele's training kicked in, and he slowly reached for his camera. The creature remained motionless, watching as he slowly moved. As he raised the camera to take a photo, the creature let out a low, resonant sound that Steele felt more than heard. He now knew that this was the source of the strange electrical vibrations he had just been experiencing. In that moment, several things happened at once. The still surface of the pool behind Steele erupted as if struck by an invisible force. The creature at the edge of the clearing moved with impossible speed, covering the distance between them in what seemed like a single stride, and Steele's normally reliable equipment, his camera, his radio, even his watch, all went dead simultaneously. Steele stumbled backward, his mind kicking into overdrive to process the events. The creature was now at his side, and it loomed over him. Its strange eyes were wide-eyed and seeming to look through him rather than at him. Steele couldn't help but think the look on its face reminded him of images he had seen in psych wards and mental hospitals. Steele could smell that musty, sweet odor more strongly now. It was obviously emanating from the creature's damp fur. For several long seconds, Steele and the creature remained locked in this standoff. Then, with another of those bone-deep sounds, the creature turned and moved back toward the forest. Its movements were fluid and unnatural in a way that resembled an amphibian in the water. The creature vanished into the shadows of the forest, leaving Steele alone in the clearing. The pool behind him had returned to its glassy stillness, as if nothing had disturbed it. It was no surprise that Steele's equipment then started to slowly come back to life, his watch beeping as it rebooted. He realized he'd been holding his breath and let it out slowly. With shaking hands, he began to document everything he could remember about the encounter. This was the most insane thing he had ever witnessed in all of his years. After noting down all he could remember, Steele made his way back to his base camp. his mind full of questions. How would he classify the creature? Why and how had it made his equipment fail? And most importantly, how would this all be received back at the office? He knew that field work never translated perfectly back to the confines of an office. He's hopeful thought that his experience will lead to future trips back to Washington State with ever better equipment that will hopefully be able to handle collecting the data. Until then, he's doing his best to understand what happened to him. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. It all started subtly, whispers around town about Blackwood Lake up here in New Brunswick, Canada. Used to be a local gem, perfect for a quiet afternoon with a fishing rod. Then came the strange occurrences. Nothing concrete, mind you, just hushed tones and sideways glances. Enough to make a place feel wrong. But that wasn't what got me in the end. It was Mark, my best friend, history buff extraordinaire, with a glint in his eye and a story about an abandoned mine near the lake. An old silver mine, supposedly, shut down after a cave-in decades ago. Now I'm not claustrophobic by any means, but going deep into a cave? No, not my cup of tea. But Blackwood Lake always had this weird allure, a dark undercurrent that was somehow interesting. So we packed some essentials, high-powered flashlights, you never know in these situations, right? And snacks. I don't go anywhere without snacks. The hike wasn't difficult, just a dusty path snaking through dense woods. Sunlight barely touched the ground, making the air feel thick and heavy. As we neared the entrance, I pulled my hat down a bit tighter. It wasn't the cool air or the way the shadows seemed to sneak up on me. It was a feeling, a prickling unease that settled deep in my gut. The entrance itself was sort of menacing, too, a gaping hole in the mountainside, half concealed by overgrown vines. We exchanged a look, a silent question hanging in the air. Neither of us wanted to be the first to back out, so with a deep breath, we stepped inside. It was like entering another world. Absolute darkness swallowed us whole, the only light coming from our flashlights. The air inside was thick and cold, clinging to our clothes like a wet rag. The smell hit us next, a metallic tang that scraped at the back of your throat. But still, we crept forward, the silence broken only by the occasional drip of water from unseen crevices and the soft movement of dirt and rocks as we walked along. With each step, it seemed like the oppressive atmosphere intensified. It felt like the mine was pressing in on us, squeezing the air from our lungs. It was such a strange feeling. Then, a flicker of movement in the distance, a faint, pulsating blue light, like the end of a campfire. It wasn't natural, though. It was an unnatural luminescence that cast an unusual glow. Suddenly, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic beat that I couldn't control, reminding me that this was not right. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mark, ever the level-headed one, mumbled something about natural gas, but the explanation felt hollow, not to mention dangerous. As we inched closer, the light pulsed faster, emanating a strange, rhythmic hum that seemed to vibrate in our bones. We stopped a few feet away, the blue orb mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. The air crackled with a strange energy, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Suddenly, the air shimmered, like when you see heat rising off of hot asphalt, distorting the light around the orb. And then, as if things couldn't get stranger, a figure materialized out of thin air, right before our eyes. It was tall and slender, its form vaguely humanoid, but not at all. Its skin was smooth and hairless, a sickly gray that seemed to faintly glow. Its eyes were solid black pits, but at the same time intense. Terror choked the breath from my lungs. I wanted to run, scream, anything to escape this thing. But my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen, like a fly caught in a spider's web. The figure tilted its head, a gesture that somehow conveyed curiosity. It didn't speak, but there was a sense of communication. Then, there was a bright flicker of light that made me close my eyes, and in that moment, the figure vanished. The blue orb flickered a few more times before fading out completely. The two of us stood there, paralyzed with fear, the silence now deafening in its intensity. Finally, Mark croaked out, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to get out of here. Now." We didn't speak, not a single word, as we scrambled back towards the entrance. I remember that in those moments, every drip of water sounded like a monstrous heartbeat. We burst out of the mine entrance, gasping for fresh air. Sunlight felt amazing, the warmth soaking us and bringing us back into a world of normalcy. We didn't stop running until we were a good distance away, backs pressed against a towering oak tree. Only then did the tremors start. My hands shook uncontrollably, the granola bar I clutched dropping to the ground. Seems silly, but that's what I remember. Mark looked ashen, his usual bravado replaced by a weird, haunted expression. We didn't need words. We both knew what we'd seen, what we'd felt. One night, a sound jolted me awake. It was the rhythmic hum, the same one from the mine, vibrating through the floorboards of my house. Panic clawed at my throat. I had no idea what to do, and so I got up and raced to Mark's apartment. He was waiting for me, his face etched with worry. "You felt it too, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. We huddled together on his fire escape, looking at the city, which gave us the sense of safety somehow. As we sat there, the city lights flickering like distant stars, the humming gradually faded away. We waited, tense and alert, but nothing appeared. No shimmering air, no otherworldly figures. By dawn, the strange phenomenon had completely subsided, leaving us exhausted and confused. We spent the next few days in a daze, questioning our sanity and debating whether to tell anyone about our experience. In the end, we decided to confide in Dr. Eleanor Thompson, a respected geologist at the local university. To our surprise, she listened without judgment and revealed that there had been other reports of strange occurrences around Blackwood Lake over the years. She theorized that the old mine might be releasing pockets of hallucinogenic gas, explaining our shared experience. While part of me still wondered if there was more to it, this explanation brought a sense of relief. Nothing more happened in regard to what we saw. And as time passed, the memory of that night became less vivid, but I can still start shaking uncontrollably if I really think about it. Thanks for listening and giving me a place to talk. There were 4 of us who were going on this hike in Harding County, New Mexico, near the Canadian River. We were planning to camp in tents, but were bringing hammocks in case there were some interesting trees to hang in during the mornings and evenings. I was looking forward to it being quite an adventure. 4 guys together for 3 days of great weather in September. Perfect time of year to be out in nature. However, I don't think any of us were prepared for what we really ended up experiencing firsthand. It's just not something that you could ever expect or anticipate. To this day, I'm still in shock. It's literally like something out of a bad horror movie. If you asked me if I thought it could happen to me or one of my friends, I would have laughed and told you no way. But oh, how naive and wrong I was. It all started when we got to the trailhead. We decided to walk about a mile down the dirt road until it turned into a path through the trees. From there, it almost felt like you were in another world. That's what made me love hiking so much. Being able to experience things that most people never do, and that feeling you get of just being away from everything. Before long, we found our camping spot and set up camp. I was totally happy with the area and even found a great place to hang my hammock. We hung out there for an hour or so and then decided to head out and explore the surrounding area. We began walking along what seemed like it would be your average hike in nature. And I say seemed because I don't think any of us were prepared for what happened next. I was in the back because I wanted to be last, so I could take pictures and not feel rushed. But when we came across our first obstacle near a stream, that's when everything changed forever. The rest of the group got past the obstacle first and continued to move on while I struggled a bit. Probably because of my extra camera gear I had insisted on lugging with me. But then, when I finally got on my way again, the rest of the guys were a bit ahead. I stopped to see if I had any good shots while I was alone, and that's when I saw something weird. There was something off the trail about 20 feet away. I could see it, but couldn't make out exactly what it was because there were bushes covering most of it up. It didn't look like anything natural, though. It looked like a pile of rags or some old blankets left there by someone. Since I had ever been this far out before, I didn't know if other people normally came out this far and couldn't figure out if it was something left by humans or not. Looking back, it was an idiot move on my part since I was alone, but I made my way toward it, and as I approached it, I could see that it wasn't blankets. It was actually some type of mangy animal just lying there. I blinked and focused and tried to make out what kind of animal it could be. I mean, it had fur, and there were definitely arms, hands, legs, and feet. But that's all I could work out. I squinted and stared at the thing. It was so big, and I was also starting to smell something totally foul. And in that instant, my brain connected the way this animal looked to stories I had heard and videos I'd seen about dogmen. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Was I actually encountering one? Just lying there, right here, today? I don't know how to really describe it all, other than to say that what you see in the movies is nothing like the real thing. It had a sickly, yellowish skin color with dog-like features and a dog's tail. Was it dead? It also had fur everywhere, especially on its head where it was long and stringy and sticking to the sides of its face like when you're really hot or have a fever. But what really stood out, what I'll never forget, was its eyes. The thing must have sensed me because it lifted its head and glared in my direction. Its eyes were a piercing, terrifying red that looked straight through me and made my stomach drop. It was like looking down a dark cave. It was as if I could personally feel its thoughts and evil intentions and wondered if it could feel mine. It didn't make any noise or anything. We just stood there staring at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 seconds. And then it slowly got up on all fours, turned around, and began to crawl off. As it moved out of sight, I couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of trick, or if it was all in my head. There's no way that creature could have just been laying there doing nothing, right? I frantically searched for my camera, but it wasn't in my backpack. I must have left it on the ground back by the stream when I had to maneuver that obstacle. And now, the dogman was walking away. In that instant, decided there's no way I was letting that thing get away without at least getting a picture of it. There was no time to go back and get my camera, so I decided to get closer and try to snap a picture with my phone. As soon as I started towards it, it immediately stopped and whirled its body around and stood up on its two hind legs. Its menacing eyes were now focused right on me, and it towered above me in a way too terrifying to describe. It then let out an ungodly growl that shook the trees behind us. That's when I knew I was a complete idiot and had to get out of there. I turned around and ran for my life back up the trail toward where we had all come from. Everyone else had been close enough to see the whole thing go down, and were so scared they were already way ahead of me. So now, there I was by myself. Behind them when I started hearing howls, what sounded like more of the creature coming from every direction. Was there a whole family or a clan? It all seemed like it was happening in slow motion, while at the same time feeling like it lasted forever. All I remember is looking over my shoulder and seeing dogmen closing in on every side. I was sure they were just about to reach their claws out and tear me apart when I broke through the tree line and saw everyone else standing there staring back towards me. but the looks on their faces made me feel that they knew exactly why I was running toward them and crying. But it turns out that the rest of the group never did see anything. They only heard the horrific screams as I made a run for it, back toward them. I got to the parking lot, took off my pack, and sat there in a daze. How in the world were we going to be able to retrieve our camping stuff? I mean, I didn't want to stay there any longer at all, let alone go back in for our tents and gear. Somehow we decided that the creatures were most likely just curious about my presence and probably wouldn't bother anyone else if they carefully went in for the stuff. We reasoned it would be best to go back in for our gear, but I would stay back at the truck and lock myself in while I waited. Truth be told, I only think they went back in because they didn't totally believe me. It took about an hour before they all returned, and thank God there was no further sign of anything. Since that day, I've been questioning myself about whether or not dogmen are real or if it was just some kind of hallucination. No one else saw anything, and so they keep telling me there must be a logical explanation. They just don't totally believe my dogman story. But I keep returning to the decision that I did really see and experience what I did. And remember, that means not just one dogman, but a whole group of them living in the forest and apparently well aware of everyone who enters their domain. Stay safe out there, everyone.